Michael Douglas reveals how he and the late Rob Reiner bonded over the challenges of raising kids with substance abuse issues. 1 week after Rob and Michelle Reiner were found dead in their Brentwood home, Michael Douglas speaks out about his bond with the director in a CBS News special, Rob Reiner, Scenes from a Life.
This is incredible. This is really incredible.
The thing that I love about Michael is that he can play somebody who's a little angry, a little rough around the edges, but he's so likable and you love him that always comes through. So he's a curmudgeon, but you also feel that underneath there's a softness and there's love there, and that eventually comes out in the picture.
When people think of Michael Douglas, they picture a man carved out of stone. A real Hollywood powerhouse. The guy's beaten cancer, pushed through brutal family chaos that played out in front of the whole world, and still kept his career shining strong for over 50 years. But the Michael Douglas who stepped forward yesterday? That wasn't the same unshakable star everyone knows. This time, he wasn't the charming actor or the respected family leader we see on screen. He showed up as a broken friend, and what he said about Rob Reiner's death hit like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just another Hollywood goodbye or a sweet tribute. It was a shocking confession that stopped everyone in their tracks. People suddenly realized there was way more to this tragedy than the headlines ever showed. You know how it goes. Rob Reiner dead, son arrested, and everyone thinks they've got the whole story. Another fallen star, another sad ending. But Michael Douglas made it clear we need to slow down and really hear what he's saying. He's not just talking as an actor. He's speaking as someone who lived through the same kind of pain. He knows the dark corners of fame, the pressure and the heartbreak that Rob was facing before it all fell apart. Douglas and Reiner weren't just co-workers, they were practically mirror images of each other. Both were born into Hollywood royalty, sons of legends who had to fight their way out of their father's shadows just to prove they were more than famous last names. Kirk Douglas and Carl Reiner raised warriors, not imitators. But the cruel twist? Both of them faced the same nightmare, brutal personal wars with their sons, tangled in addiction and heartbreak that would have crushed families far less famous. When Michael Douglas finally decided to break his silence, he didn't hide behind a PR statement or post some polished note online. He spoke from the gut, raw and unfiltered. His very first words sent chills through everyone listening because he dropped a bombshell. He admitted that 10 years ago, he had looked Rob right in the eyes and said, "Unconditional love is going to end up killing you." That line hit like lightning. We're always told love fixes everything, especially in families. But this time, Douglas showed the dark side of loving too hard. He ripped the mask off what was really going on inside that Brentwood house, a truth nobody wanted to face. He revealed that over the past 5 years, he had started pulling away from the Reiner home, not because he didn't care about Rob, but because watching that slow, painful crash with Nick was too much to handle. Everyone could see it coming, but no one wanted to believe it. To really get what Michael was saying, you've got to understand where he's coming from. He's been in those same trenches. The world already knows his own struggles with his son Cameron. The court battles, the prison visits, the humiliation splashed across tabloids, and those endless nights filled with fear that the next phone call could bring devastating news. He's lived that nightmare. But unlike Rob, Michael made brutal decisions that tore him apart. He set rock-solid boundaries that broke his heart, but saved his life, and over time helped save Cameron's too. That's why when he looks at Rob's death, he doesn't just see a tragedy, he sees a moment where nobody had the strength to step in and say, enough. He even remembered visiting Rob on the set of And So It Goes, back in 2014, when everything looked peaceful on the surface, but deep down, he said he could already feel the storm brewing. Michael Douglas talked about one visit that still haunts him. A day he went to see his friend Rob on set, and unexpectedly ran into Nick. He said the look in Nick's eyes wasn't just anger or some drugged-out haze. It was something darker, something empty, a kind of dead stare that sent chills through him. When Nick showed up, everything on set shifted, the air, the mood, the whole energy. Rob, the man everyone admired, the director who could command Jack Nicholson without breaking a sweat, suddenly looked small, fragile even. Michael said watching a man like Rob physically shake in front of his own son was heartbreaking beyond words. He explained that it wasn't about being scared of a violent outburst, it went way deeper. It was the fear of disappointment, the silent dread of a father walking on eggshells in his own home, trying not to set off another emotional explosion. That kind of fear eats you alive. Michael said that same day, He pulled Rob aside into his trailer and asked a question that still echoes in his head. How long has he been the one running the house? Rob couldn't even look up. He just stared at the floor and mumbled, "Nick's going through a tough time. We just need to help him through it." That's when Michael knew his friend was trapped in a dangerous loop, stuck in that toxic hope that someday things would just fix themselves. The kind of blind love that keeps you chained to pain. And what Douglas revealed about the final weeks before everything collapsed made it even more gut-wrenching. Everyone thought the tragedy came from nowhere, just a sudden wild night gone wrong. But Michael said that's not the truth at all. He said it was building up slowly, week after week, right in front of everyone's eyes. The warning signs were there, and nobody wanted to see them. He even shared how, 3 weeks before it all happened, Rob had called him one random Tuesday night. Michael missed the call, only saw it the next morning. When he called back, Rob sounded fine, cheerful even, chatting about a new script he was working on. But now, looking back, Michael says that call wasn't casual at all. It was a quiet, desperate cry for help that he never got the chance to answer. Michael Douglas said he now believes that in that exact moment, Rob was finally ready to do something he had never dared to do before, kick Nick out for good and break that toxic cycle that was tearing his life apart. He said Rob had reached his breaking point, ready to save himself before it was too late. But Douglas is convinced that Nick felt that shift, that he somehow knew the leash was about to snap. And according to Michael, that's the real heartbreak of it all. It wasn't some random night of chaos. It was the moment Nick realized his parents were finally ready to draw the line after years of pain and manipulation. That realization led to the hardest truth of all: the money. The thing nobody ever wants to mention when talking about loss, but in Hollywood, money runs the whole show. Douglas didn't dance around it. He went straight for the jugular. He said Rob wasn't just supporting Nick's lifestyle, he was bankrolling his own downfall. He revealed that Nick had access to accounts and funds that no one in their 30s should have been controlling unchecked. It wasn't luxury, it was lifeline after lifeline, a never-ending rescue mission that drained everyone around him. Michael explained that it wasn't about spoiling Nick. It was emotional blackmail disguised as love. Nick would use his own pain as leverage, threatening to hurt himself, disappear, or even leak private family stories if the money ever stopped flowing. Every transfer, every check, was a desperate attempt by Rob and his wife to keep the peace, to buy just one more quiet night in a house that was crumbling behind closed doors. They didn't realize they were paying for the very weapon that would one day turn on them, and what had people hanging on every word was the fury in Michael's voice when he talked about the enablers. He didn't drop any names, but he made it crystal clear that there were people orbiting the Reiner family's so-called friends, assistants, hangers-on, who kept pretending everything was fine. People who brushed off Nick's behavior, saying things like, "That's just him," or "He's a moody artist." Michael called them out without mercy, saying those were the voices that helped bury the truth while Rob's world quietly fell apart right in front of them. Michael Douglas called that kind of silence a deadly kindness. He said he'll never forget one dinner where Nick completely lost it. He hurled a glass across the room over some tiny misunderstanding. The crash froze the whole place. But instead of anyone calling the cops or telling him to leave, everyone just sat there staring at their plates while the staff quietly cleaned up the mess. Rob tried to smooth it over with a nervous joke, and Michelle, always trying to keep the peace, apologized for her son. That's when Michael said something that hit like a punch to the chest. Everyone who stayed seated that night, everyone who pretended it was fine, shared the guilt for what came later. Their silence didn't protect anyone. It just gave the violence room to grow until it exploded. Seeing Michael Douglas emotional like that is rare. The man's built a whole career on keeping it together, on staying calm even when life comes crashing down. But when he started talking about Michelle, that tough armor finally broke. His voice cracked as he called her the family shock absorber, the one who took every emotional hit just to keep everyone else standing. If Rob was the soft heart of the house, Michelle was the backbone, the one holding everything in place even while it was crumbling around her. Douglas said he's sure that's why she eventually became the main target, because she was the only one brave enough to say no. He remembered a phone call from a few months before the tragedy where Michelle sounded completely drained. She told him something that still chills him to this day: "I don't even know who my son is anymore." That's the moment, he said, when a parent realizes the child they love is gone, replaced by someone they can't reach. And according to Douglas, that final night was probably the breaking point. Michelle stood her ground one last time, refusing to keep pretending everything was okay. That moment of defiance, he believes, was the spark that ignited the unthinkable, the act that tore the entire family apart forever. When Michael Douglas started talking about the legal side of things, his whole tone shifted, the emotion vanished, and he turned sharp, calm, almost icy. That's what made his words cut even deeper. He made it crystal clear. He wasn't asking for sympathy or any kind of leniency just because Nick had a history of mental health struggles. In fact, he wanted the exact opposite. Douglas said the prosecutors needed to look hard at premeditation. He insisted this wasn't some psychotic break where Nick couldn't tell right from wrong. It was cold calculation. A move by someone who knew exactly how to twist people, how to play the system, and how to control his parents through guilt and fear. Douglas pointed out how Nick had turned himself in right away, without resistance, and immediately hired a team of high-end lawyers. That, he said, is not someone lost in delusion. That's someone trying to save himself. His voice went flat but fierce as he called it what it was: cowardice. He said it takes zero courage to destroy lives and then hide behind excuses. It was a bold, fiery statement that practically shredded Nick's defense before the trial could even begin. Then, in one of the most powerful moments of his statement, Douglas zoomed out. He looked straight at the industry itself. He called it the Hollywood curse, but not in the way people usually mean. Not superstition or bad luck. He called it a complete system failure. A world where kids grow up with fame, money, and no real limits, where saying no is almost a crime. He said the Reiner home had become like a kingdom, with a prince who was allowed to burn down the village because the king couldn't stand to lock him in the tower. Douglas turned his message into a warning, not just to Hollywood parents, but to himself, to every mother and father raising kids in this world of fame and endless privilege. His voice cracked just a bit as he said it. If you don't set the boundaries early, one day you'll wake up and realize the kingdom you built doesn't belong to you anymore, it belongs to the chaos you let grow. Michael Douglas said something that hit everyone like a cold slap. By thinking you're giving your kids the world, you might actually be taking away their ability to survive in it. He painted this gut-wrenching picture of Rob Reiner, a man who gave the world so much laughter and warmth through classics like The Princess Bride, dying in a house that had become completely drained of joy. That awful irony, Douglas said, was the cruelest truth of all. The man who made millions smile couldn't save happiness inside his own home. Then he brought up something that most people had avoided: the silence surrounding the family's other children, Jake and Romy. Douglas spoke with deep respect for them, but his words carried heavy sadness. He said their story is tragic too, because in his view they didn't just lose their parents now, they lost their brother years ago. They'd been grieving long before this nightmare even started. For years there had been a quiet divide within the family. Jake and Romy had to build walls around themselves to survive the chaos that constantly followed Nick. Meanwhile, Rob and Michelle stayed behind in the storm, refusing to walk away because they still believed that love and patience could somehow bring their son back. That belief turned them into the last ones standing and the most vulnerable. Michael said that more than once he begged Rob to sell that Brentwood house, move somewhere smaller, get protection, and let Nick face the world on his own. But Rob always gave the same heartbreaking answer: he needs a home to come back to. Those words stuck with Michael. They were the sound of a father who couldn't stop believing, even when belief was destroying him. Over time, that stunning house, once a symbol of success and family pride, became a prison built by love. And when Douglas talked about it, you could hear survivor's guilt in his voice. He couldn't help but compare his own story to his friends. He remembered how he had watched his own son, Cameron, fall deep into addiction, end up in prison, and somehow find a way back to recovery, to peace, to a second chance. And then his voice cracked as he said what everyone else was thinking but couldn't say out loud. While he got to see his son come home, Rob Reiner never got that miracle. All he got was tragedy. Rob Reiner had always turned to Michael Douglas with the same desperate question: what happens if Nick ends up in prison? He was terrified his son was too fragile, too soft, too broken to survive behind bars. But Douglas told him the truth no parent wants to hear. Prison might have actually saved his life. Rob couldn't accept that. Instead, he poured millions into private rehabs, luxury wellness retreats, spiritual gurus, and endless therapy sessions, anything to avoid the one thing that could have made the difference: accountability. Then came the revelation that left everyone speechless. Michael said he's ready to testify if he's called to court, and what he revealed next could shake the whole case. He still has old voicemail messages from Rob, recordings he never deleted. Moments where Rob dropped the public mask and spoke from raw pain. According to Douglas, those messages could completely change how the world sees this tragedy. They're not the voice of a happy father living a normal life. They're the voice of a man trapped in emotional captivity, a prison of his own love and fear that lasted more than 10 years. Douglas said he'd originally saved those messages thinking one day he could play them for Nick, to make him face what he'd done to his father, never imagining they'd end up as evidence for a jury to hear. And with that, the story stopped sounding like a random act of violence and started to feel like something much worse, a preventable death, one that spread blame far beyond just one person. He didn't hold back. Douglas called out everyone who played a part, the doctors who kept writing prescriptions without checking, the so-called friends who looked the other way, the powerful system that lets rich families cover up domestic chaos with hush money and private security teams. He said this wasn't just a story about one broken home, it was a reflection of an entire industry that protects reputations instead of people. Michael ended that part of his statement with a chilling truth. Hollywood didn't just protect the Reiner family's image, it protected the silence that destroyed them. Michael Douglas told everyone to listen to the silences between his words, the quiet moments that said more than the sentences themselves. When a journalist asked how he wanted Rob Reiner to be remembered, Douglas didn't call him a brilliant filmmaker or a Hollywood legend. He said, "As a man who loved too much." That line hit differently, not as a tribute, but as a diagnosis, a warning to every parent out there: when you refuse to let your kids hit bottom, you risk falling into that pit with them. And as Douglas put it, rock bottom has a basement. That's where Rob and Michelle ended up, trapped in the lowest level of love turned pain. The public reaction to Douglas's words was pure shock, but strangely, it also brought relief. For the first time, someone was speaking without a PR filter, without fancy wording or spin. He said what everyone secretly feared but no one dared to say. Michael revealed that for years the public had been fed a clean, sympathetic version of the story, Nick painted as the troubled son battling inner demons, fighting a good fight, but Douglas didn't buy that narrative for a second. He said straight up, that story wasn't the truth. He didn't describe Nick as a victim of his circumstances, but as a predator in his own home, a man who emotionally cornered his parents while they kept trying to save him. It was harsh, brutal even, but it rang true for people who remembered that first police photo, that cold blank stare that screamed no remorse. Douglas said that look wasn't new to him. He'd seen that same expression before, across a Thanksgiving table, on movie sets, in those quiet moments when the tension was thick but no one wanted to speak up. Every time, Rob would just look away, trying to hold on to hope instead of facing the truth head-on. He said that's the tragedy in its purest form, when fear and misplaced love win over action. And now, as the case heads into January, Douglas made it clear that this isn't just Nick Reiner versus the state of California. It's about something bigger, Rob Reiner's entire legacy. Whether this man's death will be remembered as another Hollywood scandal or finally as a wake-up call to an industry that keeps ignoring its own sickness, Michael Douglas has taken it upon himself to guard that truth, and he's not letting anyone twist it this time. Michael Douglas has become the only one refusing to let the defense twist the story. He won't let anyone paint Nick as some poor victim of circumstance. He said straight up that his duty now is to defend his friend, to make sure the world understands that Rob Reiner didn't just die. He was sacrificed on the altar of his own patience. That line alone sent chills through everyone listening. Then Douglas shared one final memory, a detail that still hangs in the air like a ghost. Rob's laugh. That huge, contagious laugh everyone knew him for. The sound that could light up an entire room. Michael admitted he hadn't heard that laugh in at least 3 years. In their last few meetings, Rob was there physically, but inside, he was gone. He was always distracted, always checking his phone, eyes darting around like a man walking on glass. He was already mourning the son he used to have while living in fear of the one standing right in front of him. That's why Douglas said the final act wasn't a sudden explosion, it was the inevitable end of a story written years ago. He begged people not to just follow the trial like it's entertainment, but to stop and ask the same haunting question he asks himself every single night. If someone with my experience, my power and my resources couldn't save his best friend, what hope is left for anyone else? He ended with a warning and a plea. This isn't tabloid gossip or another Hollywood scandal. This is a real-life tragedy, a classic downfall happening in real time, and a brutal lesson that will haunt Hollywood for generations if people keep looking the other way. If this story hit you, don't let it fade. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video. Let's make sure the truth stays alive. And drop a comment below. What do you think about Michael Douglas breaking the silence?